The morning sunlight barely reached through the small windows of courtroom number 7 as Anthony Ellis adjusted his borrowed tie. The 34-year-old high school basketball coach had never imagined he'd be sitting at the defendant's table, his future hanging in the balance. His hands trembled slightly as he looked back at his mother in the third row. Her eyes red from crying, but her face set with determination. "All rise," called the bailiff as Judge Richard Thornton entered the courtroom. Anthony stood, feeling the weight of the past 11 months, from the night of his arrest to this final day of trial, pressing down on his shoulders. He had explained countless times that he was at his cousin's birthday dinner when the convenience store robbery occurred. 20 miles away, with 15 people who could verify his presence. Yet somehow here he was. The courtroom settled into an uneasy silence as Judge Thornton adjusted his glasses and shuffled through the papers before him. At 68, the judge had a reputation throughout Westland County for running a tight courtroom and showing little patience for what he called excuse-making. His thin lips pressed into an even, thinner line as he glanced at Anthony. "The jury has reached a verdict," he announced, his voice echoing in the hushed room. Anthony's lawyer, a public defender named Tom Wilson, placed a hand on his client's arm. Tom had seemed overwhelmed from the beginning, juggling Anthony's case alongside dozens of others. During their brief meetings, Tom had often mixed up details of the case, once even calling Anthony by another client's name. In the case of State versus Ellis, on the charge of armed robbery, we find the defendant guilty. The word hit Anthony like a physical blow. Behind him, his mother let out a small cry before stifling it with her hand. This couldn't be happening. The evidence against him consisted of a grainy security camera image of someone approximately his height and build, wearing a hooded sweatshirt, and one witness who'd picked him out of a lineup after initially describing someone with different features. "Your Honor, we request sentencing be delayed pending our motion for a new trial," Tom said, standing quickly. "There are serious questions about the witness identification procedures and—" "Motion denied," Judge Thornton cut him off. "This court sees no basis for delaying sentencing. We will proceed immediately." Anthony's throat went dry. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Even Tom looked surprised, shuffling through his notes frantically. "Your Honor, the defense isn't prepared for sentencing today. We need time to—" "Mr. Wilson, are you suggesting my courtroom should operate on your schedule?" The judge's voice carried a warning that silenced the public defender immediately. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Vanessa Powell, rose smoothly from her seat. With practiced precision, she laid out the case for a severe sentence. The traumatic impact on the store clerk, Anthony's lack of remorse which was actually his continued insistence on his innocence, and the need to send a message to the community about violent crime. What she conveniently omitted was that no one had been physically harmed during the robbery, that the amount taken was less than $200, and that Anthony had no prior criminal record beyond a marijuana possession charge from when he was 19. Anthony listened in growing horror as Powell requested the maximum possible sentence. This had to be some kind of nightmare. Any moment he would wake up in his small apartment, get ready for work, and laugh about this terrible dream while driving to the high school where he coached. "Mr. Ellis, do you have anything to say before sentencing?" Judge Thornton asked, looking at Anthony over the rim of his glasses. Anthony stood, his legs barely supporting him. "Your Honor, I didn't do this. I was at my cousin's birthday dinner. The security footage is too blurry to identify anyone." The witness changed her description. "My fingerprints weren't at the scene. I've never owned a gun. I've been coaching kids for the past 7 years, trying to keep them on the right path. I would never—" "Mr. Ellis," the judge interrupted, "this court has heard your denials throughout the trial. The jury has considered the evidence and found it sufficient to convict you. Continuing to deny responsibility only demonstrates your failure to accept the consequences of your actions." Anthony felt a surge of both fear and anger. "But I'm innocent. There are 15 people who can confirm where I was that night." The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack. "That's enough, Mr. Ellis. Character witnesses are not alibis, as your attorney should have explained to you." But Tom had never called any of Anthony's alibi witnesses to testify. When Anthony had questioned this strategy, Tom had assured him that the prosecution's case was so weak that it wouldn't be necessary. Now Anthony understood just how badly he had been represented. Judge Thornton leaned forward, his face hardening. Armed robbery is a plague on our communities. Store owners and employees deserve to feel safe in their workplaces without fearing for their lives. This court has a responsibility to protect the public from violent offenders. Anthony wanted to scream that he wasn't violent, that he'd never been violent, that his students and their parents would tell the court about his patience and kindness, but the words stuck in his throat as he realized that none of it would matter. Anthony Ellis, this court sentences you to 60 years in the state correctional system. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even the prosecutor looked surprised at the severity of the sentence. 60 years. Anthony would be 94 years old if he served the full sentence. Your Honor, Tom stammered, this sentence is grossly disproportionate to similar cases in this jurisdiction. First-time offenders typically receive my courtroom, my sentence, Mr. Wilson, Judge Thornton said coldly. If you believe it's excessive, you're welcome to appeal. Next case. As the bailiff approached to take him into custody, Anthony caught the judge's eye. For just a moment, something passed between them. Not the expected contempt or indifference, but something else. Something Anthony couldn't quite identify. Uncertainty? Recognition? Whatever it was, it vanished quickly as the judge looked away, already focusing on the next file. Anthony's mother pushed past the gallery barrier, reaching for her son. This isn't right. My boy is innocent, she cried as a court officer gently but firmly held her back. I'll fight this, Mom, Anthony called over his shoulder as the bailiff led him toward the side door. Don't give up on me. The processing center at the county jail buzzed with fluorescent lights and mechanical efficiency. Anthony changed out of his court clothes into an orange jumpsuit, surrendered his personal belongings, and moved through the intake procedures in a daze. Fingerprints, photographs, medical screening. Questions about mental health and suicide risk. Ellis, called a corrections officer after several hours. Your lawyer's here. Tom Wilson looked even more disheveled than usual, his tie loosened and hair sticking up as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. Anthony, I'm so sorry, he began as soon as they were seated in the visitation room. That sentence, it's unprecedented for a first offense with no injuries. I've already filed a notice of appeal, but I need to be honest with you. Judge Thornton's sentences are rarely overturned. Anthony stared at his hands. Why didn't you call any of my alibi witnesses? Any of the 15 people who were with me that night? Tom shifted uncomfortably. We focused on challenging the identification evidence because it was so weak. I thought... He trailed off. You thought wrong, Anthony said quietly, and now I'm looking at spending the rest of my life in prison for something I didn't do. The appeals process will give us another chance. And there's something else. Tom lowered his voice. That sentence was so extreme that people are talking. A reporter from the Tribune called me asking questions about Judge Thornton's sentencing patterns. Anthony looked up. What do you mean? I don't want to give you false hope, but there have been rumors about Thornton for years. Rumors that he's unusually harsh with certain defendants. You mean black defendants, Anthony said flatly. Tom didn't deny it. I've requested the transcripts from your trial, and I'm going to review every detail. Something's not right here, Anthony. After Tom left, Anthony was moved to a holding cell with 3 other men awaiting transfer to state prison. One of them, an older man with graying hair at his temples, looked at Anthony with knowing eyes. First time? He asked. Anthony nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Thornton? The man asked, noticing the paperwork the guard had carried. Another nod. The older man sighed. Figured. I'm Leon. Did 2 stretches, both times with Thornton sending me up. Man's got ice where his heart should be. 60 years, Anthony finally said. For a robbery I didn't commit. Leon's eyebrows shot up. 60 for robbery with no priors? That's not just harsh, that's personal. Anthony thought again about that strange look the judge had given him. What do you mean, personal? Leon glanced toward the guard station before moving closer. Word inside is that Thornton's got connections. Folks who benefit when cells are filled, especially with young men who'll be there a long time. That's crazy, Anthony said, but without conviction. After what had just happened to him, nothing seemed too far-fetched. Maybe. Leon shrugged. But you might want to start asking questions carefully. That night, lying on the thin mattress of his temporary cell, Anthony replayed every moment of his case from arrest to sentencing. He thought about Judge Thornton's expressionless face as he delivered the sentence that would destroy Anthony's life. He thought about the strange look they had shared afterward. And for the first time since his arrest, Anthony felt something beyond despair and disbelief. A small, hardened seed of determination took root. He would not disappear into the prison system. He would not become just another statistic. Another black man serving an unjust sentence. Somehow, someway, he would uncover the truth, not just about his case, but about whatever was happening in Judge Thornton's courtroom. And no matter how long it took, he would find his way back to freedom. As Anthony finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, he had no idea that the path to that freedom would lead through the most unexpected person of all, Judge Richard Thornton himself. The first 3 years at Lakeside State Prison passed like a slow-motion nightmare for Anthony. Each day blended into the next in a haze of routine. Breakfast at 6 a.m., work detail in the laundry room, 1 hour in the yard if weather permitted, then back to his cell. The walls of his 8x10 cell seemed to inch closer with each passing month. At night, when the prison fell into its uneasy quiet, Anthony would take out the small notebook he'd purchased from the commissary. In it, he meticulously recorded everything he could remember about his case: the convenience store's location, the witness descriptions, the evidence presented, Judge Thornton's expressions and words. Writing helped keep his mind sharp, a silent protest against a system that wanted him to disappear. His mother visited every other Sunday without fail, despite the 3-hour bus ride each way. She brought news from home, updates on his appeals, all denied so far, and photographs of family gatherings he'd missed. Anthony noticed how she aged a little more with each visit. New gray hairs, deeper lines around her eyes, shoulders that seemed to carry an invisible weight. "I talked to Pastor Williams again," she told him during one visit, her voice low. "He's got a friend who works with that innocence group, the one that helps people like you." Anthony nodded, careful not to show too much hope. Hope was dangerous in prison. It could break you faster than despair. What did they say? They need more evidence, something new that wasn't presented at trial. She reached across the table, stopping just short of his hand as the guard glanced their way. Contact wasn't allowed. Keep the faith, son. Truth finds a way. Anthony wanted to believe her, but after 3 years of appeals leading nowhere, faith was hard to come by. Everything changed on a Tuesday in April. Anthony was sorting sheets in the laundry when the supervisor called him over. "Ellis, you're getting a new cellmate. Show him the ropes." In prison, a new cellmate meant unpredictability, potential danger. Anthony had been lucky so far with an older man named Ray, who mostly kept to himself. Ray had been transferred to minimum security last month, leaving Anthony briefly alone. When Anthony returned to his cell that afternoon, a man was sitting on the bottom bunk, Anthony's bunk. The unspoken rule was that the existing inmate kept the bottom. "That's my bunk," Anthony said, standing in the doorway. The man looked up. He was in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair cut close to his scalp and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Sorry about that," he said, standing up. First time in, still learning. Something about the way he said it didn't ring true, but Anthony let it go. "No point starting trouble. I'm Anthony. You can take the top bunk." "Daryl Washington," the man said, extending his hand. Another break from typical prison behavior. Most men didn't offer handshakes here. "What are you in for?" The question was common enough, but Anthony had learned to be careful with his answer. Claiming innocence in prison often invited mockery or worse. "Armed robbery. Store in Westland County." He paused. "A robbery I didn't commit." Daryl nodded with none of the usual skepticism. "Judge Thornton?" Anthony's head snapped up. "How'd you know?" Daryl shrugged, arranging his few belongings on the top bunk. "Lucky guess. Sort of my area of expertise." Over the next few weeks, Anthony found himself increasingly curious about his new cellmate. Daryl didn't fit the usual pattern. He spent most of his time reading or writing in a notebook similar to Anthony's. He spoke carefully, choosing his words like someone used to being listened to. And he asked questions, lots of them, about Anthony's case. "Tell me again about the security footage," Daryl said one night after lights out. Anthony stared at the bottom of Daryl's bunk above him. Grainy black and white. "Showed someone about my height robbing the store clerk. Face wasn't clear. Perp wore a hood. And the witness who ID'd you? Store clerk. First said the robber was light-skinned, around 5'8". I'm 6 feet, dark-skinned. Then suddenly at the lineup, she's sure it's me." Darryl was quiet for a moment. And your lawyer didn't challenge this? Public defender, Anthony said, the words carrying all the explanation needed. Too many cases, too little time. Another night after Anthony had shared more details, Darryl asked, "Do you remember if Judge Thornton seemed familiar with your case before it started? Like he'd already reviewed it thoroughly?" Anthony thought back. No, actually. He seemed annoyed when the prosecutor handed him the file, like he was seeing it for the first time. Darryl made a small humming sound. Interesting. A month into their shared cell arrangement, Anthony was working in the laundry when he was called to the warden's office. His heart raced. This was rarely good news. The warden, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, looked up from her paperwork as he entered. "Ellis, you've been assigned to the library. Start tomorrow." Anthony blinked in surprise. Library duty was coveted. Quiet, air-conditioned, less physically demanding than laundry. "May I ask why, ma'am?" "Request came through. Your educational background makes you qualified." She looked back down at her papers. A clear dismissal. The next day, as Anthony was being shown around the prison library by the civilian librarian, Mrs. Patel, he spotted Darryl at one of the tables, deep in conversation with another inmate. "You know Washington?" Mrs. Patel asked, following his gaze. "My cellmate," Anthony replied. She nodded. "He specifically requested you for library duty." Anthony frowned. "He has that kind of pull?" Mrs. Patel gave him a measured look. "Washington isn't your typical inmate. He was a legal researcher before. Well, before. He helps other inmates with their cases sometimes. Warden allows it because it keeps people hopeful, less likely to cause trouble." That evening, Anthony confronted Darryl. "You got me assigned to the library. Why?" Darryl sat on his bunk, calm as ever. "Access to the law library section. You need it. For what? To help build your case." Darryl leaned forward. "Anthony, I've heard dozens of stories from men claiming they were innocent. Most are lying or deluding themselves. But you—" He shook his head. "Your case has all the red flags. What do you mean?" "Judge Thornton has sentenced 23 black men to sentences at least 40% longer than state guidelines in the past 5 years. Did you know that?" Anthony stared. "How would I know that?" "How do you know that?" Darryl smiled for the first time since Anthony had met him. "Because before I ended up here, I was investigating him for a series of articles on judicial misconduct. Got a little too close to the truth. Found myself facing trumped-up fraud charges. Guess who was my judge?" A chill ran down Anthony's spine. "Thornton," Darryl nodded. "The man's dirty, Anthony, and your case might be the key to proving it." The next day in the library, Darryl showed Anthony how to access legal databases, where to find sentencing guidelines, and how to request case files through proper channels. Together, they began building a wall chart hidden behind a bookshelf in the rarely visited poetry section, connecting pieces of information like detectives in a crime movie. "Look at this pattern," Darryl said one afternoon, pointing to their chart. Thornton's harshest sentences all involved defendants whose cases would send them to private prisons, not state-run facilities. Anthony frowned. Why would that matter to him? "Follow the money," Darryl said, tapping a newspaper clipping. "Westland County contracts with Core Prison Industries for overflow inmates. Every prisoner they house means profit." Over the next 2 months, their investigation deepened. Anthony learned that Judge Thornton sat on the county committee that had approved the contract with Core Prison Industries. He discovered that his own 60-year sentence had coincided with the opening of a new Core Prison facility that needed to meet minimum occupancy requirements to receive full payment from the county. "We need someone on the outside," Anthony said one night. "Someone who can access records we can't get in here." Darryl nodded. "I've been thinking about that. My former editor still believes in my work. If we can get a package to him with what we've found so far." Anthony hesitated. "What about the Innocence Project my mother mentioned? They have lawyers, resources." "Even better," Darryl agreed. "But we need solid evidence to get their attention. They're overwhelmed with cases." Their chance came unexpectedly. Mrs. Patel, who had been watching their research with quiet interest, approached them one day in the library. "My nephew is a law student at State University," she said softly. "He volunteers with the Innocence Project clinic there. If you have something that needs to reach them." Anthony and Darryl exchanged looks. It was risky, for all of them, but it might be the only way. That weekend, during his mother's visit, Anthony carefully explained what he needed without saying too much. His mother, who had never stopped believing in him, nodded firmly. "Give me the name. I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go." 2 weeks later, Anthony was called to the prison administration office. A young lawyer in a navy blue suit was waiting for him in the visitor's room. "Mr. Ellis? I'm David Chen from the Innocence Project Legal Clinic. We've received some very interesting information about your case." For the first time in 3 years, Anthony felt something that had become foreign to him. Genuine hope. Back in their cell that night, Anthony told Daryl about the meeting. "They're taking my case. They're going to investigate Thornton's connection to the private prison company." Daryl smiled, but there was something sad in his eyes. "That's great news, Anthony. Really great." Anthony studied his cellmate. "What aren't you telling me?" Daryl sighed. "I'm being transferred tomorrow." Suddenly, unexpectedly. "What? Why?" "Someone doesn't want us working together anymore." Daryl sat down heavily on Anthony's bunk. "Listen carefully. The path ahead won't be easy. They'll fight to keep you here because you represent more than just one case now. You're a threat to their whole system." "I can't do this without you," Anthony said, the words catching in his throat. "Yes, you can. And you will." Daryl pulled out a small, tightly folded paper from his sock. "This is a name. Someone connected to Thornton who might be willing to talk. I was saving it, but now—" He pressed the paper into Anthony's hand. "Be careful who you trust with this." The next morning, Daryl was gone before dawn. The cell felt emptier than it had before he arrived. Anthony carefully unfolded the paper and read the name written there. Catherine Thornton, the judge's daughter. Finding Catherine Thornton proved harder than Anthony expected. With Daryl gone, transferred to a prison 400 miles away, Anthony was on his own again. The library no longer felt like a sanctuary, but a reminder of what he'd lost. A friend, a mentor, someone who believed in his innocence when the whole system had turned against him. Mrs. Patel noticed the change in him. One afternoon, as he half-heartedly shelved books, she approached with a cup of tea. "He was good for you," she said quietly. "Daryl." Anthony nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "His transfer wasn't random," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The warden got a call from the county courthouse." Anthony's hands stilled on the book he was shelving. "Judge Thornton?" Mrs. Patel's slight nod was almost imperceptible. "Be careful, Anthony, but don't give up." That evening, Anthony wrote a careful letter to his mother. He couldn't mention Catherine Thornton directly. All inmate mail was screened, but he had prepared for this. Before Daryl left, they had created a simple code. "Mom, remember Dad's old fishing buddy from Cedar Lake? I've been thinking about him lately. Might be worth looking up his daughter to see how she's doing. She was studying at State University last I heard." 2 weeks later, his mother visited with news. "I found your dad's friend's daughter," she said, the code flowing naturally in their conversation. "She's not at State anymore. She's teaching at Riverside Community College. English department." Anthony felt a surge of hope. Riverside was just 30 minutes from the prison. "That's great to hear, Mom. How's she doing?" His mother's eyes held meaning beyond her words. "She agreed to meet me for coffee next week. Said she remembers you." The following visit, his mother brought photographs of a garden she was planting, a cover for the real information she slipped him. Catherine Thornton had agreed to meet with a lawyer from the Innocence Project. She had, his mother whispered, stories to tell. Days stretched into weeks as Anthony waited for news. The Innocence Project lawyer, David Chen, visited twice more, each time with careful updates that revealed little. Background checks were being conducted. Evidence was being reviewed. Experts were being consulted. "These things take time," Chen explained during his third visit. "We have to build a bulletproof case." Anthony tried to be patient, but patience was a luxury that came easier to those who weren't watching their life waste away behind bars. "I've already lost 3 years," he said. "How many more before someone listens?" Chen leaned forward. "Someone is listening now, Anthony." "Several someones, including Judge Thornton's daughter." Anthony's heart quickened. "What did she say?" "I can't share specifics yet," Chen said. "But she's provided information that corroborates some of your suspicions about her father's connection to core prison industries. We're investigating further." That night, Anthony couldn't sleep. He stared at the empty top bunk where Daryl had slept, wondering where his friend was now, if he was safe, if he too was lying awake thinking about Judge Thornton and the web of corruption they had begun to unravel. A month later, The prison was buzzing with a strange energy. Guards whispered to each other in corners. The warden made an unexpected tour of the facilities. Something was happening. Anthony found out what it was when Mrs. Patel slipped him a folded newspaper during his library shift. The headline made his knees weak. Federal investigation launched into judicial misconduct in Westland County. The article detailed allegations that Judge Richard Thornton had received financial benefits from Core Prison Industries while sentencing defendants to unusually long terms at their facilities. An unnamed whistleblower had provided documents showing that Thornton owned stock in the company through a shell corporation and had received consulting fees that coincided with the opening of new prison facilities. Anthony's hands trembled as he read. This was it. The truth was finally coming to light. But would it be enough to free him? His answer came the following week when David Chen arrived for an unscheduled visit, his face flushed with excitement. "We filed a motion for a new trial," he announced. Based on new evidence and judicial misconduct, Anthony gripped the edge of the table. "What evidence?" "Catherine Thornton gave us her father's private financial records," Chen said, lowering his voice. "And something else, a journal. He apparently kept detailed notes about which cases would help meet the prison occupancy quotas." "My case?" Chen nodded. "Your name is there, Anthony, along with 27 others over the past 5 years. Hope, dangerous and fragile, bloomed in Anthony's chest. "When will the court decide on the motion?" "It's already been granted," Chen said, a smile breaking across his face. "That's not all. The prosecutor's office is reviewing all of Thornton's cases. There's talk of dismissing charges in cases where the sentences were clearly excessive." Anthony could barely process what he was hearing. "Are you saying I might get out?" "I'm saying prepare yourself," Chen replied. "Things are moving quickly now." They were. 2 days later, Anthony was called to the warden's office. She regarded him with a strange mix of respect and wariness. "You've created quite a stir, Ellis," she said, not unkindly. "Half the judicial system in Westland County is under investigation because of your case." Anthony said nothing, waiting. She sighed. "You have a hearing scheduled for next week." "Not a new trial, a special hearing to review your sentence in light of recent developments." The day of the hearing arrived with dreamlike swiftness. Anthony was given civilian clothes to wear, clothes that hung loosely on his frame after years of prison food. His mother waited in the courthouse hallway, tears streaming down her face as she embraced him for the first time in 3 years. "My boy," she whispered. "My beautiful boy." The courtroom was nothing like the one where he'd been sentenced. This was a federal courthouse, grand and imposing. At the prosecutor's table sat not Vanessa Powell, who had argued for his 60-year sentence, but a solemn-faced federal prosecutor. David Chen sat beside Anthony, radiating confidence. Most surprising of all was the woman sitting in the first row behind them, a tall, elegant woman in her 30s who bore a striking resemblance to Judge Thornton. Catherine. She nodded slightly when their eyes met. Judge Marilyn Watkins, a stern-looking woman with silver hair, called the court to order. Her eyes swept over Anthony with neither sympathy nor hostility, only careful assessment. "We are here to review the case of Anthony Ellis in light of evidence that his sentencing may have been improperly influenced," she announced. "This is not a retrial on the merits of the original case, though that may come later. Today we are determining whether Mr. Ellis's current incarceration is justifiable, given the circumstances that have come to light." The federal prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, in light of the substantial evidence of judicial misconduct in Mr. Ellis's sentencing, the government does not oppose the defense's motion for immediate release pending a new trial." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Anthony felt Chen's hand grip his arm. "Furthermore," the prosecutor continued, "our investigation has uncovered exculpatory evidence that was not provided to the defense during the original trial. A second security camera from across the street clearly shows someone matching the original witness description, not Mr. Ellis, entering the convenience store at the time of the robbery." Anthony's breath caught. There had been another camera? Evidence that could have cleared him from the beginning? Judge Watkins listened as both sides presented arguments. The federal prosecutor outlined the pattern of corruption, the financial ties between Judge Thornton and Core Prison Industries, and the statistical improbability of the sentences he had handed down to black defendants. Chen presented evidence that Anthony's trial lawyer had been overwhelmed and ineffective, that alibi witnesses had never been called, that the witness identification was questionable at best. Finally, Catherine Thornton was called to testify. She spoke in a clear, steady voice about discovering her father's journal, about the notes he'd kept detailing which defendants would serve the longest sentences at which facilities. When I confronted him, she said, he told me it was for the good of the county, that the contract with Core Prison brought jobs and revenue. He said no one would miss these people anyway. Her voice broke slightly. That's when I knew I had to come forward. Judge Watkins called a brief recess. When she returned, her decision was swift and unambiguous. In light of the clear evidence of judicial misconduct and the troubling revelations about evidence withheld during the original trial, this court orders the immediate release of Anthony Ellis. The matter of a new trial will be determined at a later date. But Mr. Ellis will not spend another night incarcerated. Based on a corrupted proceeding, the gavel came down with a crack that seemed to break something loose inside. Anthony, a dam of emotion he had held back. For 3 long years, his mother sobbed openly. Chen clapped him on the back. And Catherine Thornton, who had risked her relationship with her father to bring the truth to light, simply nodded once more, her eyes conveying what words couldn't. As Anthony walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, a free man for the first time in 3 years, he saw a familiar figure waiting by a car across the street. Darrell Washington stood there, smiling broadly, no longer in prison clothes but in a suit and tie. Beside him was Mrs. Patel from the prison library. "How?" Anthony asked as he approached them. "Released last week," Darrell said. "Turns out Judge Thornton had sentenced quite a few people who got too close to his secrets." "We have much to discuss," Mrs. Patel added. "About the other 26 names in that journal." Anthony looked back at the courthouse, then at his mother who had followed him outside, then at these unexpected allies who had helped him reclaim his freedom. "Yes," he said, feeling the weight of purpose settle on his shoulders. "We have work to do." Freedom felt strange to Anthony. Simple things overwhelmed him. The softness of his childhood bed, the ability to open a refrigerator whenever he wanted, the absence of guards watching his every move. Some nights he woke up in a panic, thinking he was late for prison count, before remembering where he was. His mother hovered nearby during those first weeks, cooking his favorite meals, watching him with worried eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. He'd lost weight in prison, and the shadows under his eyes told of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. "You need to rest," she told him one morning when she found him at the kitchen table at 5 a.m., surrounded by papers from the other cases mentioned in Judge Thornton's journal. "Let the lawyers handle this." Anthony shook his head. "I can't rest until they're all out, Mom. You don't understand what it's like in there knowing you're innocent, watching your life slip away one day at a time." She sat beside him, her hand covering his. "I do understand. I watched it happen to my son." 2 weeks after his release, Anthony met with David Chen and a team of lawyers from the Innocence Project at their downtown office. Darrell was there too, along with Catherine Thornton, whose testimony against her father had made her both a hero to some and a pariah to others. "The federal investigation is expanding," Chen explained, spreading files across the conference room table. "They're looking at the entire system now. The county commissioners who approved the Core Prison contracts, the prosecutor's office, even some of the public defenders who might have deliberately provided inadequate representation." "What about the other prisoners?" Anthony asked. "The ones in Thornton's journal." Catherine pushed forward a thick binder. "I've compiled everything I could find on each case. 26 men, all serving sentences at least 40% longer than guidelines recommend, all at Core Prison facilities." Anthony flipped through the pages, recognizing some names from Lakeside. Men he'd eaten with, worked alongside, men who, like him, had maintained their innocence. 4 cases have already been flagged for immediate review, Darrell added. Men whose circumstances were almost identical to yours, weak evidence, questionable identifications, ineffective counsel. "Not fast enough," Anthony said, thinking of the emptiness in the eyes of long-term prisoners, the way hope drained away a little more each year. "Every day they spend in there is another day stolen from them." Chen leaned forward. "Anthony, I understand your urgency, but the legal system failed them," Anthony cut in. "Failed me. We need to do more." Catherine studied him with thoughtful eyes. "What are you suggesting?" Anthony took a deep breath. We need to go public. Not just with legal filings, but with their stories. The human cost of what your father did. The room fell silent. Going public carried risks. For the ongoing investigation, for potential future trials. For everyone involved. It could compromise the legal strategy, Chen warned. Or it could pressure the system to move faster, Daryl countered. Public outrage is a powerful tool. Catherine nodded slowly. I have contacts in the media. People who would listen. The question is, Chen said, looking directly at Anthony, are you ready to become the face of this? Once you step into the spotlight, your life will never be the same. Anthony thought about the quiet life he'd imagined returning to after prison, coaching basketball again, rebuilding relationships, finding peace. That life seemed impossible now, like something from another world. I'm ready, he said. The story broke on a Sunday. The Tribune ran a front-page article with Anthony's photograph and the headline, 60 years for an innocent man, inside Judge Thornton's prison profit scheme. The article detailed Anthony's wrongful conviction, the evidence that had been suppressed, and Judge Thornton's financial ties to core prison industries. Most powerfully, it included excerpts from Thornton's journal, with clinical notes about which defendants would serve maximum time and contribute to quarterly occupancy quotas. By Monday morning, the story had gone national. Anthony's phone rang constantly, reporters seeking interviews, producers wanting him on their shows, even film directors interested in rights to his story. This is bigger than we expected, Daryl said when he visited Anthony that evening. The governor just called for an independent commission to review all of Thornton's cases. Anthony nodded, feeling both vindicated and overwhelmed. Have you seen the comments online? People calling for Thornton to be locked up in his own prisons, calling him a modern-day slave trader. Daryl's expression darkened. He's not responding well to the pressure. His lawyer released a statement claiming he's being scapegoated, that the county commissioners knew about everything. Good, Catherine said from the doorway. Anthony hadn't heard her arrive. Let them turn on each other. The truth will come out faster that way. Over the next few weeks, Anthony appeared on national news programs, testified before state legislators, and spoke at community forums about his experience. At each event, he kept the focus not on himself but on those still incarcerated. There are 26 other men identified in Judge Thornton's journal, he would say. Men like Robert Taylor, a father of 3 serving 40 years for a nonviolent drug offense. Like William Porter, sentenced to 50 years based on a witness identification that his lawyer never challenged. These men are still behind bars while we're talking. Their lives are still being stolen day by day. The pressure worked. The governor established an emergency review board to fast-track the cases of prisoners potentially affected by judicial misconduct. Within a month, 4 men had been released pending new trials, with more cases under review. One Tuesday afternoon, Anthony received a call from Chen. We've got a problem, the lawyer said, his voice tense. Judge Thornton has disappeared. Anthony sat down heavily. What do you mean, disappeared? Missed his arraignment this morning. Federal marshals went to his house and found it empty. Passport is gone. Bank accounts cleaned out. The news hit Anthony like a physical blow. After everything, the years lost, the corruption exposed, the public outrage, Thornton might escape justice? They'll find him, Chen assured him. He can't hide forever. But Anthony wasn't so sure. Men like Thornton, with money and connections, often found ways to evade consequences. The following day, Catherine asked to meet Anthony at a small coffee shop downtown. When he arrived, she was sitting in a corner booth, a large envelope on the table before her. I received this yesterday, she said without preamble. From my father. Anthony stared at the envelope. You've heard from him? The authorities are looking everywhere. It was delivered by his personal attorney. She pushed the envelope toward Anthony. It's for you. With unsteady hands, Anthony opened the envelope and pulled out a letter written on expensive stationery. The handwriting was neat, precise, the same handwriting he remembered from court documents during his trial. Dear Mr. Ellis, he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. By the time you read this, I will be beyond the reach of American law enforcement. I have no intention of spending my remaining years in prison, though I recognize the irony in that statement given what I have done to you and others. I will not offer excuses or justifications. What began as a simple financial arrangement, helping the county secure a profitable contract with Core Prison, evolved into something more insidious. The power to determine a man's fate is seductive. To wield that power for profit is unforgivable. My daughter has shown more courage and moral clarity than I have demonstrated in my entire career. She was right to expose what I had done. I am not writing to ask for forgiveness as I do not deserve it. I am writing to provide you with the enclosed documents. They detail every case I manipulated, every defendant I sentenced unjustly, and every payment I received. This information goes beyond what was in my journal. It includes names of co-conspirators, dates of transactions, and offshore account numbers. Use this information to free those who remain imprisoned due to my actions. Consider it my final ruling from the bench, one of restitution rather than punishment. Judge Richard Thornton. Anthony looked up at Catherine, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. He's admitting everything, she nodded, and giving us what we need to dismantle the entire system. That evening, Anthony, Daryl, Catherine, and Chen gathered in the Innocence Project office to review Thornton's documents. The evidence was damning. Detailed records of meetings with prison executives, copies of offshore bank statements, even recordings of phone calls with county officials discussing which defendants would receive excessive sentences. This is enough to free everyone, Chen said, his voice filled with wonder. Every single case. And to prosecute dozens of people who enabled this, Daryl added. Anthony sat back, emotions washing over him in waves. Relief that those still imprisoned would soon be free. Anger at the years stolen from him and others. A strange, hollow feeling at the thought of Judge Thornton fleeing rather than facing justice. What happens now? He asked. Chen gathered the documents carefully. Now we go back to court. Not just for those 26 men, but for everyone sentenced by Thornton over the past decade. Every case gets reviewed. And the system that allowed this? Anthony pressed. That's a longer fight, Catherine said quietly. One that doesn't end with my father or Core Prison. It's about money in the judicial system. About who gets quality representation and who doesn't. About who our society values and who it discards. Anthony nodded, understanding that his journey wasn't ending but transforming. What had begun as a personal fight for freedom had become something larger. A mission to change a system designed to profit from human captivity. As they left the office that night, Daryl put a hand on Anthony's shoulder. You know, when I first met you in that cell, I thought I was helping you. Now I'm thinking maybe it was the other way around. Anthony looked at his friend, remembering those dark days when hope seemed impossible. We helped each other, and now we're going to help everyone else. 1 year after Judge Thornton's disappearance, Anthony stood outside Lakeside State Prison watching men walk free. Each carried a small box of belongings. Each blinked in the bright sunlight as if they couldn't quite believe what was happening. Family members waited in the parking lot, holding signs, crying, rushing forward to embrace fathers, sons, and brothers they thought they might never hold again. That's 17, Daryl said, making a check on his clipboard as an older man named Vincent Jackson emerged through the gates. Vincent had served 11 years of a 40-year sentence for a burglary that evidence now showed he couldn't possibly have committed. 9 more to go, Anthony replied. Plus anyone else who comes forward. In the months following Judge Thornton's confession letter, the Emergency Review Board had worked through each case mentioned in his records. So far, 24 men had been exonerated or had their sentences dramatically reduced. Some, like Anthony, had been victims of outright corruption. Others had received unfair sentences for crimes they had committed, their punishments inflated to meet prison occupancy quotas. Not everyone was supportive of the mass releases. Local news coverage showed protesters holding signs about being soft on crime and politicians warning about dangerous criminals returning to the community. But the evidence of corruption was too overwhelming to ignore, and public opinion had largely shifted after seeing the human cost of Thornton's scheme. Mr. Ellis? Anthony turned to see Vincent approaching, his gray hair catching the sunlight. The man's eyes were tired but clear, his handshake firm. I wanted to thank you, Vincent said. My grandson was 4 when I went in. He's 15 now. Because of you, I'll see him grow up. Anthony felt a lump in his throat. It wasn't just me. A lot of people worked to make this happen. Vincent nodded. I know, but you were the first domino. Without you, none of this happens. As Vincent walked away toward his waiting family, Catherine appeared at Anthony's side. She looked different now. Her hair shorter, her clothes more casual than the elegant suit she'd worn when they first met. Working on the cases had changed her just as it had changed all of them. "Judge Watkins called," she said. "They found my father." Anthony's breath caught. "Where?" "Costa Rica." Living under an assumed name. She looked out at the families reuniting in the parking lot, her expression complex. "They're bringing him back to face charges." Anthony nodded, uncertain how to feel. Part of him wanted to see Thornton face justice, to stand trial the way he and the others had been forced to do. Another part recognized that no prison sentence could truly balance the scales after so many lives had been derailed. "How are you holding up?" he asked Catherine. She gave a small, sad smile. "It's complicated. He's still my father. What he did was unforgivable, but he's still your father," Anthony finished. "I understand." Later that day, Anthony visited his mother. Her health had declined during his years in prison. Stress, the doctor said, takes a physical toll, but she'd rallied since his release. Today she was in the garden planting tomatoes with careful hands. "More men released today?" she asked as he joined her, kneeling in the soft dirt. "5, he replied, helping her place a young plant in the ground. "Vincent Jackson finally got to go home." She nodded. "I remember his mother from the support group. She'll be happy to have her boy back." The family support group had been his mother's idea, a place where relatives of those unjustly imprisoned could share resources, offer comfort, and advocate together. It had grown from 6 people meeting in his mother's living room to over 100 members with regular meetings at the community center. David Chen called. Anthony said, patting soil around the tomato plant. "The state legislature is voting on the reform bill next week." His mother's hand stilled. "Do they have the votes?" "It's going to be close. That's why I need to go to the Capitol tomorrow, speak at the committee hearing." She studied his face. "You look tired, son." "I am tired," he admitted. "But I can't stop now." The Ellis Justice Reform Act, as the media had dubbed it, would fundamentally change how the state's criminal justice system operated. It would end contracts with private prisons, establish an independent review board for sentencing, provide funding for public defenders to handle fewer cases, and create strict transparency requirements for judges' financial interests. Opposition was fierce. Core Prison Industries had spent millions lobbying against the bill. The Judges Association claimed it undermined judicial independence. The District Attorneys Association warned it would make prosecution more difficult, but support was growing too. Videos of men like Vincent Jackson reuniting with families they thought they'd never see again had gone viral. Anthony's testimony before congressional committees had been watched millions of times online, and investigative journalists had uncovered similar patterns of corruption in other counties, suggesting Thornton's scheme wasn't an isolated incident. The next morning, Anthony dressed carefully in the suit Chen had helped him buy for his media appearances. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, he hardly recognized himself. The scared young man who had stood before Judge Thornton 4 years ago seemed like a stranger now. Darrell picked him up early for the 2-hour drive to the state capitol. Catherine was already there, meeting with legislators she knew from her father's political connections. It was ironic, Anthony thought, how the very network that had enabled Thornton's corruption was now being used to dismantle it. The committee room was packed when they arrived. Reporters lined the walls, cameras ready. Anthony spotted familiar faces. Men who had been released, family members who had fought for years, activists who had amplified their stories. When his name was called, Anthony approached the microphone. The prepared statement in his pocket suddenly felt inadequate. Looking out at the room full of people waiting to hear what he would say, he decided to speak from the heart instead. 4 years ago, I stood before a judge who saw me not as a human being deserving of justice, but as a means to profit, he began. I was sentenced to 60 years for a crime I didn't commit, not because evidence proved my guilt, but because my imprisonment would help fill prison beds and line people's pockets. I lost 3 years of my life behind bars. That might not sound like much compared to 60, but let me tell you what 3 years means. It means missing your mother's birthdays. It means not being there when a student you coached graduates high school. It means watching your own life slip away one day at a time, knowing you're innocent but powerless to prove it. I was lucky. I found allies who helped expose the truth, but many others weren't so fortunate. Some died in prison, never knowing that their sentences were part of a corrupt scheme. Some lost decades before the truth came to light. This bill won't restore those lost years. It won't erase the trauma of wrongful imprisonment, but it will help ensure that profit never again takes priority over justice in our courts. It will help ensure that no one else has to endure what I and so many others have endured. Anthony spoke for 15 minutes, his voice growing stronger with each word. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment before erupting in applause. Even some legislators who had publicly opposed the bill were nodding thoughtfully. Outside the committee room, a reporter asked, "If Judge Thornton is convicted, what sentence do you think he should receive?" Anthony considered the question carefully. "I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in reform. Whatever his sentence, I hope it serves the cause of justice rather than the cause of profit." 3 days later, the Ellis Justice Reform Act passed by a narrow margin. As Anthony watched the vote tally on television, surrounded by friends who had become like family over the past year, he felt something he hadn't expected, a sense of completion. The work wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Other states had similar problems. The federal system had its own issues with private prisons. True reform would take years, maybe decades, but something important had changed. People were listening now. The system that had once seemed impenetrable had shown its cracks, and through those cracks, light was beginning to shine. 1 month later, Anthony stood in the gymnasium of his old high school. The basketball court had been refinished, the school board having decided that a coach wrongfully imprisoned deserved to return to his position if he wanted it. "Welcome back, Coach Ellis," said the principal, handing him a whistle. Anthony looked out at the young faces watching him, teenagers full of potential, unaware of how easily the system could derail their lives. He had considered declining the job, continuing to work full-time on justice reform, but Daryl had convinced him otherwise. "You can do both," his friend had said. "These kids need to hear your story too. They need to know that one person can make a difference, even against impossible odds." As the students gathered around him, Anthony felt the weight of the past 4 years, the injustice, the struggle, the hard-won victories. But he also felt something new, hope. Not just for himself, but for a future where justice meant more than profit, where the truth mattered more than power. "All right, team," he said, the whistle familiar in his hand. "Let's get started."